So let's get started with metabolism and ATP. Metabolism is the totality of an organism's chemical reactions. Metabolism is a property of all life. A metabolic pathway begins with a specific molecule and ends with a product. Each step is catalyzed or sped up by a specific enzyme. Without enzymes, metabolic pathways would proceed very slowly. There are two types of metabolic pathways: catabolic pathways and anabolic pathways. Catabolic pathways. Catabolic pathways break down molecules from the environment. Living things use the energy derived from breaking the bonds in these molecules to build structures and drive cell processes. Exergonic reaction. Catabolic pathways are exergonic reactions. The change in Gibbs free energy is negative. Thus, they release energy and occur spontaneously. So if we take a look at this graph here, you can see this axis is looking at the amount of free energy, and this is looking at the progress of the reaction. So here you see the amount of free energy in the reactants, and here the products. And you can see that the amount of free energy released during this reaction is negative, or less than zero. Therefore, there is a negative change, and this process can occur spontaneously. Anabolic pathways. Anabolic pathways synthesize complex organic molecules and power cell processes using the energy derived from catabolic pathways. So some examples of anabolic pathways include building bones, building muscles, building starch, and powering active transport. Click here for a mnemonic device. Endergonic reaction. Anabolic pathways are endergonic reactions, and so here the change in Gibbs free energy is positive. Thus, they require an input of energy and do not occur spontaneously. So here we have that a similar graph to what we just saw. Here is the free energy, and this is the process of the reaction. So here you can see the amount of free energy in the reactants and in the products. And here you can see that the amount of free energy required, or that change, is more than zero. So it's positive. It requires an input of energy, and it does not occur spontaneously.
In all metabolic pathways, exergonic and endergonic, entropy increases. In exergonic reactions, the total energy released includes both free energy and heat, which is dispersed, unusable energy. This release of heat results in an increase in entropy. In endergonic reactions, the energy that is required to form the bonds of synthesized molecules, but is not stored in the bonds, is released as heat. This release of heat results in an increase in entropy. Living things must expel this entropy and obtain more low entropy energy.
Free energy and metabolism. Biological systems often need an endergonic reaction to occur, but on its own, it won't proceed spontaneously. To be able to occur, the endergonic reaction is coupled to a reaction that is exergonic, so that together they are exergonic.
By coupling or combining these reactions, more free energy is released than used. The coupling of the two reactions is spontaneous. A cell does three main kinds of work: mechanical, or motion, transport, or crossing a barrier, and chemical, or changing a molecule. To do work, cells manage energy resources by energy coupling, using an exergonic reaction to drive an endergonic one.
ATP. Cells can store the energy from catabolic pathways in a molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. ATP can be broken down later to fuel anabolic reactions.
ATP is a nucleotide consisting of a nitrogenous base, adenine, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. It's similar to DNA and RNA nucleotides, but ATP has 3 phosphate groups and DNA and RNA only have 1. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, includes 3 phosphate groups. Each phosphate group has an ionic charge of -3e. In this model of ATP, each PO4 3 is circled in blue. E is the charge on an electron, 1.6 times 10 to the -19 coulombs.
ATP. The phosphate groups repel each other since they each have a negative charge. Therefore, it requires work to add this second phosphate group to go from AMP, which is a monophosphate, to ADP, a diphosphate. To add the third group to go from ADP to ATP, which is the triphosphate, requires even more work since it is repelled by both of the other phosphate groups.
This is like the work in compressing a spring. The energy from the work needed to bring each phosphate group to the molecule is stored in that phosphate bond. When the bond is broken to go from ATP to ADP, significant energy is released. Going from ADP to AMP releases less energy, since there's less total charge in ADP than ATP.
The bonds between the phosphate groups of ATP's tail can be broken by hydrolysis. Remember, that's a reaction with water. Energy is released from ATP when the terminal phosphate bond is broken. The released energy is equal to the work that was done to form the bond. That work overcame the electrostatic repulsion between the last phosphate group and the initial ADP molecule. The result is a chemical change to a state of lower free energy.
In the living systems, the energy from the exergonic reaction of ATP hydrolysis can be used to drive an endergonic reaction. Overall, the coupled reactions are exergonic. Click here for more resources about ATP. ATP drives endergonic reactions by phosphorylation, transferring a phosphate group to some other molecule, such as a reactant. The recipient molecule is now phosphorylated. 3 types of cellular work are powered by the hydrolysis of ATP: transport, mechanical, and chemical. Here is the transport work: active transport, moving ions across a membrane. Then we have mechanical work, which involves muscle contractions. And finally, chemical work is putting monomers together to form polymers. Here's an example of cellular work that is powered by ATP. Molecular motors move organelles around the cell. The motor proteins require ATP for movement. Here's another example of cellular work that is powered by ATP. Pumps in cell membranes move sodium ions out of cells. These pumps use ATP. ATP is a renewable resource that is regenerated by the addition of a phosphate group to ADP. The energy to phosphorylate ADP comes from catabolic reactions in the cell. The chemical potential energy temporarily stored in ATP drives most cellular work. The ATP-ADP cycle occurs constantly in every living cell. It occurs in each of us about 10 to the 21st times per second, or this many times per second. That's a lot of zeros. These energy conversions are required for life. ATP, ADP, and P are constantly being recycled and reused. The regeneration of ATP. You can see that energy from catabolism, exergonic energy-yielding processes, go in, and then the energy for cellular work, endergonic energy-consuming processes, go out.